What it do, what it do. This is the Brothers on Books podcast, where you find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you'd like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. If you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. For the original episodes, the OGs, please visit brothersonbooks.com. I am Jack Alwell, and with me, as always, is my brother, Alex Alwell. Allie Bear, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jack. How you doing?
Pretty good. It's a little early for us, Al.
It is.
We're trying to squeeze this in before work, so.
Well, you're working today. I'm not, but I may have been a little lax getting this book read, so that may
Wait, why are you not working today?
be my fault. Uh, Sorry, I think I lost you a little bit there.
Well, why are you not working today?
I'm going to Savannah.
Oh, I didn't realize it started today. Okay.
Well, it's like a 6-hour drive, so I just figured I'd take the day off. And
Okay.
yeah, I'm going to play in a soccer tournament. This may be I don't know how many more soccer tournaments I'm playing in. It's taking
Okay.
hard on the body, takes time away from other things, but it's good to see friends. So
Time away from your pickleball.
I guess you read between those lines pretty easily. But yes, that is exactly what I meant.
Okay. So what book are we discussing today, Al?
We were doing the book Mastery by Robert Greene. Uh, I didn't I
Now,
didn't
this is our second time we've discussed a Robert Greene book, and we also read The 50th Law. Wait, I have it right here, actually. The 50th Law.
our second episode.
And it was our second episode, and that was a very fascinating episode. And I kind of got the Robert Greene bug there, but we just hadn't. I don't know if you'd read another book, but between then and now, but I had not, and so I like that you picked this book, and I look forward to more Robert Greene books, I think.
Yeah, I read his well, I shouldn't say I read. I listened to his newest book, The Daily Laws at work. Uh And I mean, before reading this, I've read most of his books now or listened to. I think the only one I haven't read is the 33 Strategies of War. But
Mhm.
all of his books are very good. I would say just the general outline is he really does a deep dive. I would say into not only human emotion but human actions and like I guess uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of uh, I'm blanking. Ways in which, if you want to achieve something, what people have done to achieve that and how they've mastered skills. I think he really delves into it in this book and on traits that people had on how they became good at things. But he also sort of really gives a broader overview of that in his first book, The 48 Rules of Power.
Okay.
So I guess with that said, Jack, no, I was trying to think back before we started recording. I was trying to think back how because I remember I read the 48 Laws of Power probably I think it would have been 2019, and I can't exactly remember how I picked that up or how I decided to read it, but I was happy that I did, and I enjoyed all of his books. So I guess with that said, Jack, what were your initial thoughts?
I liked a lot of the stories on individuals. Some people that stuck out were the stories on Albert Einstein, and I would say Benjamin Franklin, and the people that went into the Amazon rainforest to try to convert people into Christianity. I thought that was
The
interesting
Everett,
story.
I believe that was Daniel Everett and
Yeah,
his wife.
the I guess the one knock I would have, it seemed a little bit repetitive, and like he would shift like the same story into different segments of the book. I don't know if he was doing that just to show like how they so he broke up the mastery like framework into three distinct phases. You have the first step is apprenticeship. The second phase is the creative active. And then the third is mastery. And I don't know if he was just showing those different people along those different phases, but I guess I was having trouble. Like when I would reread things about, like, Albert Einstein sitting in the patent office, or it just felt a little bit repetitive. I don't know. Well, could you tell if there was like a reason, or do you just want to like bring it back to your mind?
Yeah, I sort of thought that too. I also kind of thought it was more or less trying to highlight the phase. Uh, he was trying to highlight a particular part of the phase that the person was in when he was talking about it. So, like, talking about the apprenticeship, I felt like he was talking about Einstein. In the patent office, just thinking about the problems of, I guess, what became relativity. Then as you progress along the path towards mastery, you're talking about the people and the different parts of their lives on those
So,
different phases.
so like on the Einstein aspect, so would you consider that like him working at the patent office was his apprenticeship? Because I kind of viewed him as one that he was kind of on his own and just like thinking like very hard.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the patent office in and of itself was his apprenticeship. I felt like how he used his time was his apprenticeship, more or less like he was just devoting the patent office allowed him the time to freely think about the problems he wanted to think about. So it was really the time aspect of him sitting there thinking about the problems that I think was that allowed him to come up with his then simple and general
Mhm.
theories of relativity.
Yeah, because I didn't know. I actually thought he did was like more in academia. I didn't quite realize he kind of did not like authority. So, okay, so here's another point that I kind of wanted to bring up. So in the 50th law, which I guess was made after mastery, but it talks, I mean, in mastery, they talk a lot about you have to like go through the drudgery work, but there's
Yeah.
also this like balancing act of knowing when to kind of veer off from the norms of society. Like, I guess that's the part I kind of grapple with. Like, how do you balance going through the drudgery work with knowing when to like pivot or not? And he brings up a lot that if your heart's like only half in, like your results are going to be lackluster. Your work's going to suffer, and it's just not really a recipe for long-term success. So I guess, do you have any thoughts on like the balancing act that is drudgery versus trying to break out of that rigid mindset and kind of go off on your own?
So I guess there he's given quite a few good talks on this book, and the part of the book he highlights the most, the part that he says is the most important, is the first chapter, discover your calling, like the life's task.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of leading into what you were saying, if you don't know, I mean, he refers to it as your life's task. People call it like your life's purpose. If you're not doing something that is your like calling, yes, it's everything is going to be, he more or less says you're not really going to be able to become a master in your field because you're not going to be doing something that you like. You're not going to be able to sit through the endless hours of repetition necessary for like the learning required to become a master in the field. Uh, so I think the way you balance it is you have to make sure you're in what is your purpose. Like, because if you're not doing what your life was, I guess, or I guess as he would call it, your life's task, you're not going to become, uh, I guess, a master. And I think when he says a master, he means like a master. And what I mean by that is like I would refer to myself as an expert in the field of chemistry, but I am by no means a like on the pedestal of like greatest chemist of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of, I guess it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on this. I kind of feel what he's saying in that I remember when I started grad school, like everything was so interesting, everything was so new. It was very easy for me to just sit down and, work at research for 10 or 12 hours a day, and then go home and like read papers and read chemistry books and just learn a lot. And that was like 6 or 7 years ago. And now I'm like, yeah, it's like whatever, it's chemistry. I don't really feel the need or I don't really feel the desire to put in that amount of time into continuing my education in the field, which is not, I would say, a good thing. So I kind of get where he's coming from in that, because I think he says in your like late 30s, early 40s, you sort of get burnt out and it becomes, sort of rote and not pleasant.
Mm-hmm. And I think he also mentioned that sometimes you kind of just have to change perhaps your perspective of why you're doing something. So maybe you do have a bigger purpose in terms of like family or something that then changes your perspective of the work that you're doing and like why you're doing it. So maybe just reshaping the why of what you're doing. But I totally get like when I started my actuarial training, I love going to study like hours and doing practice problems. And it's become it hasn't, like, I still like reading a ton, but it's kind of veered off a little bit.
Right, but
I'm not
you don't like reading about. Well, I guess you like reading about the whole life stuff, but you don't really like reading about being an actuary, do you?
no. I mean, and the thing is, I've never really like. Well, I guess there were some papers we had to read for the upper level exams, but yeah, it was a lot of just memorizing by that point. I kind of like doing problems more than reading about laws and regulations. But okay, so I guess the first stage of apprenticeship, like, would you consider that, do you have like a mentor, would you say, or have you had a mentor, or how do you feel like?
Well, I would say, I mean, yes, I most definitely had a mentor. My graduate student advisor would, I mean, they're referred to as mentors. So
Uh-huh.
he was my mentor for all of his, good and bad qualities, which there were both of. Um, so I guess, really, what is the ideal apprenticeship like? What are you
Mhm.
looking for?
I think it's kind of tough because, and he brings up that sometimes it's tough for people to seek out apprenticeships because it's kind of almost acknowledging to yourself that you're not competent in some area.
Yeah,
So sometimes you're kind of shielding yourself from that, like, kind of pain that you're going into something that you don't really know about. And I feel like this was kind of me. Like, I shied away from asking questions to a lot of people that were older than me. But I think recently I've gotten a little better about, and I think part of it actually is, so before, because I didn't really have much to offer someone, but like now you can go pay someone to take their class, or go do some sort of alternative educate. Like, well, Ellen and I did a land flipping class where we paid someone to teach us how to do something. So I thought that was kind of like a cool sort of apprenticeship into a different type of real estate. Um, but I guess it comes down to like not feeling superior and like being open to criticism and notes and critiques. And I actually, back to the whole life stuff. Art Nelson Nash, I think, calls this the like arrival syndrome. Like, you want to avoid feeling like you've already like arrived at your destination. Like, you want to avoid that at all costs. Like, do not start feeling superior. Like, there's always something you can learn from someone.
that's a good point. I felt like he made a interesting point in this section, uh, talking about people's security,
Mm-hmm.
and he was saying that like uh, people acknowledge that they need an apprenticeship are very are very secure, like in themselves, because you acknowledge that you don't know the material, and that you need someone that is a master, that is better than you and the more knowledgeable than you in the field, to teach you. And there's really nothing wrong with that. Like, it's normal. Like, I mean, just because usually in your apprenticeship, you're young, you're like a child, and it's normal for like a parent or anyone that's older to teach a child. But he was saying, like, the people that don't acknowledge that they need to learn are the ones that are really insecure, sort of like what you were saying, and they're just looking to protect their ego from their own shortcomings and their own
Mhm.
like lacks of knowledge.
Yeah.
So
And
I
then
thought that
yeah.
I just thought that was interesting. Like, that was a interesting way I thought to phrase it, because I would have never thought that. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, there are definitely times that I feel especially not really with like chemistry questions, but like when I'm dealing with like biology questions, there are a lot of times I feel self-conscious like asking questions because I don't really know a lot,
Mhm. Yeah.
which is not good. Um,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I get in that too. I'm like, yeah, am I gonna look stupid asking this question? Or
right.
um and then I guess for the people that are kind of saying, well, I don't have any like people around me that could possibly help me, or they did talk about just, reading like voraciously and trying to take in as much info as you possibly can. And
I mean,
I guess that's
I don't know. I feel like now it's the easiest time. Probably you have so much access to information now. Like, uh, I mean, if you have internet access, you can just go listen to. I mean, I feel like we've talked about probably whole life policies the most of anything on this podcast. Would you say that's correct?
um yeah, yeah, maybe
Definitely,
it's like one specific topic. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely up there. I mean, I found out about that just randomly listening to podcasts, and then I sent it to you. And I was like, this can't be real, and and then we've now, I think, done like, I think, two books together, and I think you've done one or two books on your own about it.
Hmm.
And we both have policies, but I mean, just but there are hundreds of YouTube videos up on it, where you can just
Yeah.
every like couple of weeks, I feel like I just listen to probably a couple new hours of whole life policy videos,
Hmm.
just hear more about it.
Yeah, yeah. YouTube is like literally amazing. It's almost like overload on like what you want to pursue, because there's like so many things you
So
can learn
much,
about.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That
Hell,
is
I actually just I pay like a couple $100 for like a YouTube class, Graham Stephan, like because I really like his videos, so I bought his class. So um moving on, there was this idea like during the apprenticeship on this social intelligence, and they bring up the story of Benjamin Franklin, and how even though he's like great at what he does, it sounds like he wasn't fitting in with the norms of the, I don't know, was it I guess the company he was working at, and he noticed a lot of bad things were happening around him.
because he didn't want to contribute to the beer fund
That's right. That's what it was.
at a print. I think he was at a printing press, and it was either I believe it was in England or London.
Uh-huh.
London in England. But yeah, he didn't want to contribute to the beer fund because he did not drink, and everyone got upset with him.
Hmm.
And then
Yes.
he started contributing, and then there were no problems.
Yeah, and then because they had this part in that social intelligence chapter that touches on like conformism, and Robert Greene saying kind of treat work like a theater performance, and not show you're different until you're a master, because you need people to like you at the end of the day to to function and learn what you need to learn and gain what you need to gain.
Yeah, I mean that's really the interesting one in that more or less, he talks about like the whole book about like really kind of breaking away from social norms and following your own path that is set up, for your life. But then at the same point, he's very good in all of his books about acknowledging that you need, like, if people don't like you, if people don't want to help you, you're going to have a hard time. And I feel like he really emphasized that when he's talking about the Hungarian doctor Semmelweis, the
Mhm.
guy who was the guy who more or less like figured out that if you just wash your hands as a doctor, like when you're, you know, uh, giving birth to a baby, you reduce the mortality rate in the females and the babies by like, 80%. And I mean, this would have been, I think it was the 16 or 1700s. Like, if that would have happened in modern day, he would have been up for a Nobel Prize, like easy. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he like died more or less impoverished because he just bickered with the head doctor at the hospital instead of just kind of conforming to what the guy wanted, being likable, easy to get along with until he had really fleshed out his ideas and then he could just publish them. Uh,
Yeah.
the reason I also bring that up is because when he was talking about that story, that more or less sounded exactly like academics today, where people just care more or less only about their egos and just will fight incessantly about their own ideas. Uh,
Mhm.
so I sort of thought that was funny.
I guess a question, what parts of your life do you feel like you're conforming to, like maybe just be accepted and take the next step, I guess?
I mean, I have a job. I
Uh-huh.
mean, the way I dress,
Dressing is exactly what I was thinking. I feel
yeah,
like I feel
I,
like I would dress. I mean, and I'm not really even dressed up, but like, yeah, like how I would dress and like appear on certain like videos is different than how I would want to dress. But the fact of the matter is people look at that in a certain way and react in a certain way to people, whether you're in sweatpants, they'll view you differently than if you're in like a suit and tie in terms of like your authority. And because I think he talked about in the book, they watched a jaywalker. Was this, or am I thinking of a different book? Or I think it was this book, but there was a guy like in sweatpants jaywalking and like nobody followed him. But then they put a guy in a suit and he jaywalked, and like I think there was like a lot more people that followed him. And it's just based off of how he dressed, nothing else. Like nobody knew anything else about him.
hmm,
It's kind of interesting.
yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of way, dress. I mean, I just bought a new car. I mean, I felt like the type of car I bought was trying to not that my old car was bad, but like I felt like I definitely got comments on it. Like, why do you drive such an old beat up car?
Mhm.
And so, why does it matter? Like, who cares? But
But then you see like some of these YouTube creators that will rent and buy these, Maseratis,
Maserati,
Lamborghinis
right?
because it's a good return on their investment. Because literally, if you have a video of you driving like a Lamborghini, the views just like pop. So like,
Right. Yeah, because people want the status, like they want the status, and uh, yeah, I agree with you on that. Uh, but for
yeah,
most people, it's meaningless. Like, I don't know. But yes,
yeah.
uh,
Okay, so here let's start moving to the creative active phase of mastery. So this is the second phase. Um, so let's see here. He breaks this down into 3 steps. There's the creative task, which is when you're kind of just setting it up. You kind of need to be obsessive, and you got to have patience and faith that what you're doing will yield something important in the end. I didn't really have too much else on that one, I guess. The second part, creative strategies, is the one I found super interesting. And he talks about how our mind tightens over time in terms of it's less flexible, less adaptable for new ideas. And he harps on this idea that you have to let in alternative ways of thinking. And then he gives 5 strategies to open your thinking or make your thinking looser. And I don't know, there's a couple tangents we could go on here, but some of the notes, at least that I wrote down, where you need to be able to feel doubt and uncertainty for as long as possible. And the fact that the need for certainty is the greatest disease the mind faces. And that is interesting because I think a lot of people want to have that comfort and they want certainty. So how can we combat that? And some of the things he says, seek out different types of groups, read unrelated books, listen to different schools of thought on any sort of number of topics, and see how your mind responds. And he brings up the fact that like we now kind of ridicule some people in the past for doing certain things, like having slaves, having all sorts of rituals. So I guess one thing I did want to talk about on the podcast was, like, in 700,000 years, if they're looking back at our time, those people, what do you think those people will say? Like, how can these people in like 2023 be doing this? Or like, what were these people thinking? Like, are there...
the one that comes to mind really quickly for me is oh my God, they ate meat, is the one. I think I could see in the future where most meat is either more or less grown, or it's kind of like impossible meat, where everything's a substitute, so you don't have to like do the like the livestock farming, like no dairy, no cow farms, no chicken farms.
Interesting. So you think so is that like you don't mean like the brand Impossible, do you?
Yeah,
Or you just...
I think in the future, most of like our quote unquote meat will become from not grown meat but made meat, like Impossible. Yeah.
Man, that's like hard to think about.
I mean, it's
Or
like
hard for my mind to... yeah.
Right. I mean, if you think about, I mean, if you listen to, oh my God, I can't think of the guy's name. Uh, Whatever the CEO of the Impossible is, the guy who started it, he was a professor either at, I think he was a biochemistry professor at Berkeley, I want to say. That may be wrong. But I mean, he was saying that more or less, uh, you're not going to get people to switch to vegetarian diets by just telling them it's good for the environment, it's good for themselves. You have to provide them with a alternative source that more or less tastes the same and is cost about the same or costs less.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, their production costs are going to continue to go down as time goes on. So I think once you can make an Impossible burger that tastes as good as a normal burger for cheaper, I think people will eat Impossible burgers. I mean, there's always going to be some holdout for some time, but after a certain point, I think it will go that route. The other one I could see is like, oh my God, they used oil. In the future, I could see it like, oh, they were polluting the environment so much. I could see people thinking about only green types of energy sources.
It's interesting.
I don't know. What would you say?
Okay, the things that came to my mind, because I think, well, they taught, I don't know if it was in this book, but I've heard other people kind of talk about like the idea of slaves. Um, and I think sometimes when I view pets, I kind of think I see that kind of as slavery. Like, and I could see people in the future like ridiculing us for like what they put these like animals on leashes and like so I could see that. And then the other thing that really gets to me now is like the money situation, the currency situation. The idea that people were actually working for something that could be manipulated or just created out of thin air. This concept, I could see people just being like, "What? Why would anyone do that? Why would
Oh,
anyone allow themselves to be kind of like enslaved like that?"
I mean, I guess on that, the pets idea is interesting, but on the money idea, I push back is that we've more or less been doing that for like 1,000 years already. There have been
That's true. That's true. And I guess I guess that part just hasn't changed. Like, I mean, I hear people criticizing people back in the day for doing it, and yet we're still
still
here
doing it, right?
doing it. It's just
I think the issue with that is that takes I don't know. I think it takes a lot of education. I think for the masses to figure out why that's bad. I remember when you started talking to me about Bitcoin. I think it would have been, I don't know, we were at your house. I think it was probably 2017, maybe.
mhm.
Uh, you just kept going off on it, and I was like, "What is Jack talking about? This is like Bitcoin is used for like to buy." In my mind, I'm like, Bitcoin is used to like buy drugs and like hire hitmen. Like, why do I care about this? It's just like another form of money. Whatever. And now I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. I mean, I wish I would have listened to you then and bought some instead of when I finally did. But yeah, it's okay.
The next halving's next year, so
Yeah,
hopefully
hoping
load up and hopefully we see a pop.
I still buy my $500 a month of Bitcoin. I'm
That's
hoping
good.
I'm
Okay.
hoping we hit I'm hoping we hit six figures.
Yeah.
Uh, so from the creative strategies about opening your mind,
Hmm.
sort of one of the ones that I thought was really interesting was this negative capability,
Hmm.
and how like it's just as equally important to look at things that don't happen or aren't there as it is to look at things that are there. And he sort of made the analogy that when you're in business, uh, a lot of times people make the mistake of only looking at what is on the market and then
Hmm.
trying to optimize it. But in reality, you should be looking at what is the market missing and how do you fill that gap? Because
Hmm.
that's I mean, the point he's making is like it's way more profitable to more or less fill an unmet need than try to optimize something that's already in place and just make it a little better.
Hmm. But
Uh,
I guess, that kind of goes to would you rather buy a business or build a business? Because like real estate, kind of the formula is there for you to, you know, take a hold of and kind of run with so that's kind of like buying a business when but there's a lot more, there is more uncertainty and
right.
um
It's easier to do that, but like
yeah.
if you're looking at the people that really like, if you're looking at the people that are the top of the top, they're not more or less. They're inventing something new. They're bringing something new to the market.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
it's the Bezos, the Musks, the Zuckerbergs. They brought something new to the market. They didn't. They didn't buy something existing and then optimize it a little bit.
Yeah, actually when you say that, there's a good book, I'm forgetting the author's name, but I think it's called The Blue Ocean Strategy, that talks about this idea of, going into like blue oceans where there's no competition. So basically trying to, identifying things where products or markets where you have zero competition. And but Robert Greene talked about that a little bit too.
It's also one of my favorite strategies of Catan is to place my settlements on parts of the board that no one is there.
There you go.
You have open expansion. It's like a auto win.
Yeah. So another creative strategy is allowing for serendipity. And that's so like you said in the first part, when we focus really hard, our mind narrows. And then one of those unintended consequences is that it's harder for us to see other possibilities. And when we're in a more relaxed state and just like open to things happening, change happens, and you're open to it. And I think, I was kind of thinking about how I went on like that Europe trip after I got fired in 2016. And I was just kind of like, I'm down and out. Like, I don't really, there's nothing for me to lose anywhere. And I was just like open to like meeting people and like seeing different things. And that's how I ended up meeting my wife Elena on that trip. And I could really, I guess, relate to keeping an open mind through just doing random stuff.
So yeah, I would say a lot of the greatest scientific inventions or discoveries have come through serendipity. And it's interesting because you really, having now, worked in labs for 10 years, not only do you have to be open to serendipity, he sort of, I feel like he doesn't necessarily like explain enough or highlight enough like how much of a master you not only have to be in the field, but yeah, you have to be a specific person, because there are a lot of people that they see interesting things, and I'm definitely guilty of this too. Like I get interesting results, but it's not the result I want, and I'm more guilty of this in my job than I was in grad school, because like for my job, it's very specific what I want. Like the emphasis is more on results and not like a process. So it's like, yeah, I don't care. Like I just want the result that I need to get the work done so I can go home.
So are you saying like if you were just on the process, maybe you would investigate that weird result a little more? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Like if you had more, if things more, if things weren't so, in some, for better, so rigid, like things
Mhm.
are rigid and you feel like there's a time pressure to get work done, I feel like having more flexibility in how things are done allows people more autonomy to investigate uh, interesting results. And I've even heard about I heard about some biotech companies where they just allow for the scientists to be very independent and just kind of uh, investigate, you know, whatever it was that they were looking at, and that kind of to tap into sort of serendipitous results, uh, which I think,
That's kind of interesting. You could hire a bunch of like Einstein type or like people that are just interested in learning stuff or thinking about things really hard, and
right. And
just
then,
pay them to think really hard, and
like,
maybe they'll come upon some.
yeah, obviously, like there is an overarching goal that you need to be working towards, but when things are very rigid, people tend to just, look for, uh, people just look for the results that they want or the results that they need, and don't really investigate some of these more interesting things.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Mm, I guess just sort of as a tangent before we continue on, was there, of all the people he highlighted, was there anyone that really stuck out to you?
So that I would say, okay, the one that I was most, I guess, mind boggled by was, I think, the guy that was trying to read the hieroglyphics from the Rosetta Stone.
Champollion.
I think that I just didn't understand how he could, and this was decades, I think, he spent on this, right?
Yeah.
And he ended up learning all of these
Languages.
lost or extinct languages. And I just couldn't really, I couldn't tell what, how is he so obsessed with this aspect of life? Like, to devote your whole life and I, for that. And I didn't really, I guess maybe he thought it would somehow change the world, and maybe it did in some ways. But I was, I think, the most, maybe I was like inspired or in awe of a man like that, that would just devote so much time to something that seemed like just endless abyss.
Yeah, I mean, when I read that, I just could not believe that someone would dedicate that much time to it.
And I guess the one other thing that really, I had actually never heard the theory of relativity kind of like explained the way.
I don't know. I
I,
distinctly remember one night in my
well,
house in Ann Arbor where we got into a pretty heated discussion about it, and I gave. I mean, so I have to say, well, we can talk. I don't know if it's really important. Like,
Albert Einstein spent a lot of time, it sounded like almost 10 years, thinking about, I guess, this scenario of, a train coming and, light hitting different spots, and depending on where you're standing, how someone views that, and how it really is relative on what you consider like immediate, or that lightning, those two lightning bolts are hitting at the exact same time, equidistance from one person, but not equidistance from another, a different person. And that was kind of like mind blowing. But I think it's kind of cool to just hear these stories and think that they're not just, I don't think they're like just geniuses. I do think that there's a process and a very just eagerness, and I guess I was just also in awe of just the, like, his imagination, like the fact that he would be thinking on this scenario for so long and then come upon this realization. So those were the two that stuck out. Well, what about you?
well, so just I'll answer that question in a second. But what you just said is, I was honestly, I think, my main takeaway of the book, which is that these people more or less aren't like they aren't special. Like, I think Robert Greene does a good job to highlight the fact that anyone can achieve these things if you just put in the time. Uh, and if you go back, I don't. So every chapter he ends with a reversal of like where some of these like I guess some of these things aren't necessarily true. Like some of these paths to mastery. And I think it's under the apprenticeship where he's talking about getting your 10,000 hours in. He says there's no reversal to this. You have to become a master, you have to put in the time. And what was really striking to me is I listened to him give a talk in a book that I did, I think by myself, Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. He didn't do the study, but I think he kind of popularized the thought that he popularized the belief that 10,000 hours leads to an expert in the field. But in that book, the one thing I really hated about it was he more or less made it sound like if you weren't in the right circumstances, it didn't matter. Like if you didn't have the right circumstances to achieve something, like you weren't going to achieve it even if you did the work. But I feel like what this book really highlights is that it doesn't matter your circumstances. If you put the time into a given field, You may not be the best in that field, but you will be successful.
Mhm.
I just feel like that's a very like I feel like it's a very empowering thought. Uh, where I feel like Gladwell's is kind of like depressing. That's
Well,
at least
I mean, there is kind of like a a goodness to fit aspect in certain fields, I would say,
sure that is true. Yeah,
because
that is
like I mean, if you have some disability, I mean, you're probably not going to be able to be an elite
right.
athlete in some way. So there are some things that.
So I mean, and that ties into your life's, I would say, in his words, your life's plan, like,
Mhm.
or in the words of my favorite poet, Charles Bukowski, "Don't try," uh, meaning like don't try something that you shouldn't be trying yet.
Mhm.
But yeah, the person that I think it's also kind of personal to me. The person that really stuck out to me was Darwin. He
Okay.
talks about Darwin a lot, and I think I can really relate because I've been to the Galapagos and I've seen those finches, and the amount of uh, yeah, the amount of scrutiny he must have dedicated to all that. And I mean, he then talks about how he studied barnacles just for 8 years. The amount of scrutiny he must have given to those animals and plants to come up with those ideas, I think is honestly to me, I can't understand it. Like I can't fathom it. Uh,
I
it
actually didn't realize how long that journey was. I think it was like 5 years on a ship.
the Beagle, yeah, very
Yeah.
long.
So that was that's impressive. That's I mean, it kind of also makes me think that I don't know, in an age where we have there's just like the distraction level is just so ramped up compared to other generations. Like I almost feel like some of our young people are at a mass disadvantage in that way. Um, that yeah, I just feel like there's more distractions now.
So I've thought about that for a while now. It's like I mean I've noticed like since I put a TV in my room. I mean I still read a decent like I still obviously read these books with you, and but since I put a TV in my room, the amount I read has dropped.
Hmm.
So I now, instead of like reading for an hour every night, a lot of times I'll just read for like 10 minutes or 20 minutes, or I'll read with the TV on. It just like, yeah, easy entertainment, I think, makes you less good at other things that I think
And,
detracts from your life.
yeah, and just like less observant and like thinking like a lot of these stories they are talking about like these people taking long walks and kind of letting their mind wander and looking at trees and birds and leaves and paying attention to details. I mean, he even brought up the that group in the Amazon. They didn't even have like a language. They didn't really talk in the past or future tense. They
All
were just
present.
like all present. Like they are in the zone, like survival mode, like paying attention to every little detail. And like some people now are just like lost, like on their phones, looking at Twitter, Instagram, and it is kind of yeah, it's a little scary in some ways.
Definitely. I mean, I don't know if you've felt this. Do you feel like your attention span is what it used to be?
Um, I would say no, but I also think I don't have like I feel like when I get in like a goal zone, like where I say like, okay, the next like 100 days, I'm gonna like try to, call this number of property managers or post this number of videos. Like if I don't have something like that I'm writing down, I feel like my mind wanders a lot and I spend a lot of time looking at soccer news and I do spend a good amount of time like on my brokerage account. I mean, I kind of consider that education though, because I like learning about like trading strategies and uh, risk management in that way. But and then when I was studying a lot, I had to be pretty focused. But I found after I failed some exams, like, and I lost some of my mojo. Like I did feel like I was getting distracted way more often. And it's kind of like when you have success in something, then that's when you're less distracted because it's kind of like feeds on itself. But I feel like, especially when I've had like some hiccups, like on the negative side, I feel like it's almost made it worse in terms of getting distracted. I'm not sure if you would how you feel, but I guess you said the TV thing already.
I mean, yeah, I mean, TV, my phone, like I just hate it. I find myself like scrolling on, I don't even like going on Facebook. I just find myself scrolling on Facebook because I don't know, like sometimes I don't know what else to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, man, I just want to like chuck it at the wall, but then I feel like I need it for my life.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, I mean, like in borderline, want to like throw my TV out too, just so I stop
Mm-hmm.
watching it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people always talk about in terms of changing habits, it's easier to just change your environment. So like if you're trying to go on a diet, just chuck all the ice cream
Ice
out,
cream
chuck
out,
all
yeah,
yeah, just don't even give yourself the
yeah,
option.
doing it right. I mean, he talked.
Um
I think it was in this. He talked about. Oh, sorry, it wasn't. I was listening to. I was listening to a YouTube video about finding your purpose, and this guy was literally talking about how like people will say like, oh, like to discover myself, I went and hiked the Himalayas, and it's like, well, why do you have to go hike in the Himalayas to discover yourself? Like, you live with yourself. And the guy was like, well, I mean, do you? Like, you're bombarded by all of this like outside influence and outside like advertisements all the time.
mhm,
It's impossible just to be with yourself unless you, um, at least today, unless you put yourself in this sort of semi-isolated environment where you can truly get away.
mhm.
Uh,
I think that's actually why I like training for like the half marathon so much. Now that you say it, just being out in nature, just having time to just run and just literally be by myself. I mean,
yeah,
so I guess sometimes I would listen to a podcast, but not often. I would normally just run.
yeah.
Um, so I guess I don't know. Do you have anything else? I mean, there. I don't know if you looked up the architect Calatrava that they touched upon, but that guy actually made the turning torso that we saw in Malmo.
Oh, really? I
Yeah,
didn't look that up.
yeah, and he also made the art museum that I've seen in Milwaukee.
Okay.
So I thought that was kind of cool. His buildings look very futuristic.
Did
um,
you? I I listened to Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. Uh, wasn't for me, but I guess everyone else loved it.
and
My
then
other,
I guess the one story we didn't really talk about. I mean, I don't need to go deep into it, but like I thought I liked the Wright brothers story.
oh
How
yeah,
like the government was literally funding all of these other competitor or like all these like specialists like super like academics to like build this flying contraption, and then you have like the Wright brothers from this like bicycle shop that have like mastered the mechanics of bicycles and figure they can take this on, and they did it for like a fraction of the price. So
I
that
think
I
it
mean that if that doesn't say just let like the tinkerers like play
roll.
out
Yeah.
the market and just do their thing, I don't know what else will.
I think they said they did it for under $1,000,
Yeah,
which in the 1910s would have still been a lot of money, but not nearly as much as what these other people were spending.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So okay, Al, so what are your closing thoughts?
well, I guess just you know, the other I had one other statement, which is that mainly because I read one of his other books, Noam Chomsky. I think I read Failed State, which I sort
Ah,
of negatively reviewed. But I would just like to point out, even in this book, Daniel Everett, the guy who was living with the indigenous people, pointed out that Noam Chomsky was wrong in his actual field of expertise, which is linguistics. So
there
I
you
thought that
go.
was funny. My closing thoughts on this book were well, for one, I liked it. I liked it a lot. It's easy to read. easy to get through. But yeah, my closing thoughts were that of sort of empowerment, that like, anyone, if you have a goal in your life, if you put enough time towards it, you will find success in that field, regardless of whatever it is. I mean, some of the stories that he talks about in this book, I mean, I'm guessing you felt the same way, but I was like, why on earth would you ever want to dedicate your life to that? But these people did, and they found incredible success with it. And just because someone's goals is different than your own doesn't mean they're like not worthwhile. But if you put the time in, you will be successful. And I think that's a very powerful thought. And
Mhm.
I I had two quotes that I really liked. Let me see if I can find the first one. The first one I would say summed up was it's like the absolute selfish person is the person that only consumes and does not create. Uh, that was paraphrased. I'm not seeing the exact quote in the page that I have marked. But the second quote that I had, which I think is very true for modern day society, is that everyone is born unique, but most people die a model. And I thought that was a very good quote.
Very nice.
What about?
I mean, so my closing thoughts are, we view a lot of these people as geniuses, but there's a long path that goes into that. I would also state that deadlines are important, because he brought up either whether they're outside your control and forced upon you, or you self-impose them. But if you have deadlines, it helps you ramp up the energy. As they talked about, I think he was French, he was a mathematician, and he basically got challenged to a duel, and he thought he was going to die the next day. And then his mind started ramping, and he just put all these formulas and theories on paper in a night, basically. And sure enough, he did die the next day. But that goes to show you when you're really up against the wall, what your mind is capable of. And then I kind of like this Daniel Everett part. And he says, what prevents people from learning even something as difficult as haraha, I don't know if I pronounced that right, is not the subject itself. The human mind has limitless capabilities, but rather certain learning disabilities that tend to fester and grow in our minds as we get older. These include a sense of smugness and superiority whenever we encounter something alien to our ways, as well as rigid ideas about what is real or true, often indoctrinated in us by school or family. And I think a lot of people are just like too closed off, and that arrival syndrome. And I think I still I still struggle with this like balancing act of kind of putting your head down and grinding it out versus kind of breaking off from the norms. I think that's part I'm still struggling with a little. But you want to take us out, or you want me to take us out?
I can take us out. Well, I think, Jack, it's been a good episode. But please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. I'm Alex Allwild. Jack, it was a pleasure.
It was.
I think it was it was a good. I'm glad I picked this book. I think it was a good pick.
I'm glad you picked this book too. We might need some more Robert Greene in our lives. So, but I guess you've read most of them.
I would definitely read most of them again, though.
Okay.
What book are we doing next?
We are doing Discrimination and Disparities.
Thomas Sowell.
Thomas Sowell, right?
The legend. The legend himself.
Cool. Okay. So I'll see you next time.
À vie tout ça.